First off, I just want to say that I experience hallucinations categorized under psychosis rather than schizophrenia. Apparently my symptoms don't quite line up, or they're not severe enough for the full diagnosis. But let me tell you, I have been so terrified by my hallucinations that I've literally pissed myself in fear. I can't even begin to imagine how bad it must be for people who have it worse than me. Now, my scariest hallucination? That would have to be my very first visual one. I was in school, around 10th grade, and at that point, I had already been hearing voices for a while. It was disorienting at first, but I was getting used to the idea that I could hear things no one else could. It was becoming my normal. That day, I got up from my desk to use the bathroom, nothing out of the ordinary. The halls were quiet, empty, just the dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead. But the second I stepped out of the classroom, I saw him. A man. Tall, motionless, facing me. No face. Just smooth, empty skin where his features should have been. For a second, I just stood there trying to process it. My brain immediately went to some rational explanation. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired. I blinked a couple of times, shook my head a little, looked again. And he was gone. I didn't hear footsteps. No rustling of clothes. No sound at all. Just gone. The hallway was still empty. I remember laughing to myself as I walked toward the bathroom, forcing myself to brush it off. Guess I'm seeing things now too. Haha. Nervous joke. But I didn't really feel nervous yet. Just unsettled. Then I turned the corner. He was there again, standing in the doorway of the bathroom. That's when the fear really started to creep in. I stopped in my tracks, staring at him, and this time I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just some guy wearing a weird mask. Maybe it was a prank or something. So I did what any normal person would do. I asked him to move so I could go in. And then another kid came out of the bathroom. Walked right through him. Right. Through. Him. I remember my stomach dropping, my breath catching in my throat. The kid who walked past gave me this weird look, like I was the strange one, and just kept walking. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. What the hell do you even say in that moment? The faceless man, though, he stepped aside like he was letting me through. And I don't know why, but I walked past him, giving him as much space as possible, never taking my eyes off him. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I kept telling myself I was imagining it. It wasn't real. Then, when I got inside, a girl was there, standing near the sinks. At first, I was relieved. A normal person. Someone real. I even started to tell her, "Hey, you're in the wrong bathroom," because, I was in the boys' restroom. But then it hit me. She didn't have a face either. And then they started walking toward me. That's when I panicked. Full, absolute terror. I bolted into one of the stalls, locked it, and just broke down. Hands shaking, heart racing, crying like a little kid. Because I knew, at that moment, that I had lost it, that I was insane. I didn't leave that stall until the school staff found me and talked me into coming out. I've since graduated and moved away from there, but sometimes they still show up, the guy and the girl. They don't do anything, so I don't know what to make of it. But that first time scared the living shit out of me. I've lived with schizophrenia for as long as I can remember. It's not something I talk about often, not because I'm ashamed, but because it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. My hallucinations are primarily auditory, voices that feel as real as anyone else's. Some are familiar, almost like old friends if you can call them that. Others are strangers, fleeting and unpredictable. But there's one episode that sticks with me, one that I can't shake no matter how much time passes. It wasn't the darkest thing I've experienced, not by a long shot, but it was one of the hardest. It's the kind of thing that makes you question everything, reality, sanity, even your own humanity. It started like any other episode. I was sitting in my living room, trying to relax after a long day. The voices were there, as they always are, but they were background noise at that point, like a radio playing softly in another room. I'd learned to live with them, to tune them out when I needed to. But then, something shifted. One of the voices, a voice I'd come to recognize over the years, suddenly cut through the static. It was panicked, desperate, and it was calling my name. Not in the usual way, not like it was trying to get my attention or mess with me. This was different. This was raw, primal fear. I froze. I didn't know what to do. The voice kept calling out, pleading for help, and then it happened. It started to die. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like listening to someone being torn apart, piece by piece. The cries were agonizing, guttural, and they didn't stop. They just kept coming, louder and more frantic, until it felt like the sound was inside my head, like it was crawling under my skin. I tried to block it out, to cover my ears, but it didn't help. The voice was part of me, and there was no escaping it. I remember sinking to the floor, clutching my head, trying to make it stop. I was crying, begging for it to end, but it just kept going. The voice was fading now, but the pain in it was sharper than ever. It was like it was clinging to me, like it thought I could save it. And I couldn't. I couldn't do anything. I felt helpless, useless, like I was failing someone who needed me. And then, just like that, it was gone. The voice, the one I'd heard for years, the one that had been a constant in my life, was silent. It didn't fade away or drift off. It was ripped away, violently, and the silence that followed was almost worse than the screams. I don't know how long I stayed there on the floor. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that by the time someone found me, I was completely out of it. They had to sedate me, and when I finally came to, it was almost a full day later. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The voice was gone, and it hasn't come back since. I've had darker hallucinations, things that would probably haunt most people's nightmares. But this was different. It wasn't just the horror of what I heard. It was the helplessness, the guilt, the feeling that I'd failed someone who depended on me, even if that someone wasn't real. I still think about it sometimes, about that voice and what it went through. I don't know why it happened or what it meant, if it meant anything at all. But it stayed with me, like a scar that never quite heals. It's a reminder of how fragile my mind is, how easily it can turn on me. And it's a reminder that no matter how much I learn to live with this, there are some things I'll never fully understand. I only have psychosis, so not full schizophrenia, but I still have hallucinations and delusions. I'm a woman, and to be honest, both of my worst experiences are pretty unbelievable, because they sound so unusual compared to what you usually hear about in the media. My worst hallucinations have actually been tactile, touch-based. I get this a few times a year, but 2016 was the absolute worst. Let me tell you, it's one thing to hear about people seeing things that aren't there, but when you feel something that isn't there, it's a whole different level of terrifying. It's like your brain betrays you in the most intimate way possible, and you're left questioning what's real and what's not. It all started back in 2014. At first, it was almost subtle. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, and then I'd feel it, something invisible climbing into bed with me. I know how that sounds, but this was real to me. It would spoon me, like a person would. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my back, the warmth, the way it seemed to mold itself to my body. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was sleep paralysis, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. But it kept happening, and it started to get worse. It became more aggressive, more handsy. I don't even know how to describe it properly, but it felt like it was testing boundaries, like it was exploring. I was terrified, but I didn't tell anyone for a long time because how do you even explain that? Eventually, I went on antipsychotics, and for a while it stopped. I thought maybe it was over, but then 2016 happened, and it came back, big time. This time, it wasn't just in my bed, it wasn't just at night, it followed me. I don't want to say it had sex with me because, again, it's a hallucination. It's not real. There was nothing visual, no figure, no shadow, no ghostly apparition. But something happened. I felt it. And after that, it was like it had claimed me. It started touching me during the day, outside of my bedroom. I'd be doing the dishes, and suddenly I'd feel this invisible force pinning me against the sink. It wasn't painful, but it was strong. It felt like a power play, like it was saying, "Look what I can do. I can get you anywhere I want." And that's what made it so terrifying. It wasn't just random anymore. It felt calculated, like it had intent. I remember one time, I was standing in the kitchen and it happened again. I froze. My hands were still in the soapy water, but I couldn't move. I could feel it pressing against me, like it was trying to assert dominance. I kept telling myself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But it felt real. My heart was racing, and I could feel this cold sweat breaking out all over my body. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally let go, I just stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make it stop. I went back on antipsychotics after that, and thankfully, it went away again. But I live in constant fear of it coming back. I dread the next flare-up because I don't know how far it will go next time. I don't know if it will stay in the realm of touch, or if it will escalate into something worse. It's like living with this invisible predator that could strike at any moment, and I have no way of defending myself against it. It's not just the hallucinations themselves that mess with you. It's the anticipation, the constant wondering if and when it will happen again. I've tried to explain it to people before, but unless you've experienced something like this, it's hard to understand. It's not like seeing a shadow out of the corner of your eye, or hearing a voice whisper your name. This is your body being violated by something that doesn't exist, and yet it feels so real that it might as well be. It's isolating, and it's exhausting. Some days, I feel like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for it to come back and remind me that I'm not really in control. So yeah, that's my story. It's not something I talk about often because it's so hard to put into words, and honestly, it's embarrassing. But it's my reality, and it's something I have to live with. I just hope the meds keep working, because I don't know if I can handle it coming back again. Scary shit. This one time I had a hallucination that absolutely terrified me. I've had my fair share of weird experiences, mostly tactile hallucinations, where you feel things that aren't really there. But sometimes it's not just touch. Sometimes it's visual, auditory, even gustatory, like tasting something that isn't real. And let me tell you, when all those senses start messing with you at once, it's like your brain flips a switch and reality just slips away. So this one night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Everything seemed normal at first, but then I started feeling this weird sensation in my mouth. It was like my teeth were loose, like they were just barely hanging on. You know that nightmare people have where their teeth fall out? Yeah, it was exactly like that, but I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. I ran my tongue over my lower front teeth, and that's when it hit me. There was a gap, a hole, like my teeth had just crumbled away. I could feel the empty space, and it was so real. I could even taste blood, metallic and sharp, like I'd bitten down too hard or something. My heart started racing, and I was convinced my teeth were falling out. I mean, fully convinced. I wasn't just scared, I was panicking. I kept thinking, this is it, this is really happening. But here's the thing, when you're in that state, when your brain is playing tricks on you, you can't tell what's real and what's not. I was so out of touch with reality that I couldn't even trust my own senses. I kept touching the spot with my tongue, feeling that gap, tasting the blood, and it all felt so vivid. I was too scared to look in the mirror at first because I didn't want to see the damage. I just sat there, frozen, trying to figure out if I should call someone or go to the hospital. It was like my mind was split in two. One part screaming that this was real, and the other part whispering that it couldn't be. But the fear was overwhelming. I couldn't shake it. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to get up and go to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror, still terrified of what I might see. I took a deep breath and opened my mouth. And there they were, all my teeth, perfectly fine. No gap, no blood, nothing. I just stood there, staring at my reflection, trying to process what had just happened. It was such a relief, but at the same time it was unsettling. How could something feel so real and not be? How could my brain trick me like that? I spent the rest of the night wide awake, too scared to go back to sleep. I kept running my tongue over my teeth, checking to make sure they were still there. Even though I knew it was a hallucination, the fear lingered. It's one thing to have a nightmare, but when you're awake and your brain convinces you that something so horrifying is real, it sticks with you. I still get chills thinking about it. It's like my mind turned against me, and for a few moments, I was completely at its mercy. Not a schizophrenic, but I hallucinated a fair bit as a teen, and still do sometimes. No drugs, no sleep deprivation, nothing like that. Just happens. And let me tell you, the worst one I ever had still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I was 17, lying in bed late at night, just scrolling through my phone, not even that tired. My room wasn't completely dark. There was a streetlight outside my window, so I could see pretty well. At some point, I glanced up, and there was something standing in my doorway. At first I thought it was my mom, just a shadowy figure, tall, unmoving. But then I noticed the legs were too long, the arms too, just stretched out, like someone had pulled it in every direction. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it staring at me. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real. Blinked, looked away, counted to 10, looked back. It was closer. Not walking, not shifting, just closer. Still standing the same way, just watching me. At this point, my whole body was locked up. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe too hard, like if I acknowledged it, it would get worse. My ears were ringing, my hands were clammy, but I just stared. And then, it started to tilt, not like a person leaning forward, more like a puppet, like something bending at the wrong angles, its head lowering while the rest of it stayed in place. And I swear to God, I could hear something. A creaking sound like wood splitting. I grabbed my blanket and threw it over my head like a kid. Stupid, I know. But I couldn't take it. I laid there, heart pounding, forcing myself to breathe slow, telling myself it wasn't real, just another hallucination, just my brain playing tricks. Eventually I fell asleep, and he wasn't there when I woke back up.